Like many people who step away from the monotheistic faith they are born into, I did so because I really struggled with the concept of hell. I was raised Mennonite, Satan was everywhere, temptation was everywhere, God loved you, but he's testing you in case you really need to suffer for eternity for whatever reason he decided beforehand. He just created you to go to hell? Who is hell? What is Satan? After reading all of the Tanakh, the Gospels, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and several books listed here, I realized that there are roughly 4 eras of Satan. You have the Satan in the Old Torah, the Satan in the written Hebrew, the Satan in the Septuagint New Testament, and the Satan of the early church and Quran, all different. And we sort of have an evolution going on here from the adversary to this modern Satan. The adversary is it's the Hebrew word Satan. Then when the books of the Tanakh were written down, the adversary in Kings and Job are integrated into the same character, meaning that there is now the adversary. The Greek translations are where Greek-speaking Jews everything up because they didn't know what they were talking about because they weren't from around the area. And now you have modern Satan, which is additional lore added over thousands of years. Before we break down all 4 sections, I just want to bring up this quote by Henry Ansgar Kelly. I think it beautifully sums up what we're going to talk about. The scriptural Satan wants to keep bad people out. The Satan of tradition wants to make good people bad. If you grew up in an oppressive Christian, Muslim, or Jewish home where you have these terms like Satan thrown into your face at a very young age, you're liable to be scared. But as we're about to see, the origins of Satan are far from scary. Beginning, we have an adversary, or on the little evil scale, a non-evil entity. Here's a breakdown of what I was talking about before, the word Satan. So at top we can see Ha-Satan. Ha-Satan just means the Satan. Satan is stand opposed to someone or an adversary, to be against someone. So we can see Satan just means adversary. The question is now, how did the word Satan get transformed from just meaning an adversary into an adversary? To answer that, we can just look at where Ha-Satan is brought up in the Tanakh. In Zechariah 3, it states, I was further shown Joshua, the high priest, standing before the angel of God, and the accuser standing at his right. But the angel of God said to the accuser, God rebukes you, O accuser. Here Zechariah is explaining Ha-Satan as someone named the accuser, or someone who is going to judge you. In Zechariah's instance, he's talking about his battle between Satan and God, and then being judged by them both at the end of his trials, where he fails and he's given dirty clothes. Technically, the very first time Ha-Satan is ever brought up in the Tanakh is Numbers 22:22. In this story, God's telling Balaam to travel somewhere to spread his message, and Balaam is doing so, but not for the right intentions. So, God was incensed at his going, so an angel of God took a position in Balaam's way as an adversary. Literally, it's saying an angel of God became Ha-Satan to Balaam. Early on in the Tanakh, these references to Satan have nothing to do with a figure, rather someone who is fulfilling in a role as an accuser or an adversary, someone in someone's way. And to further prove that point, we can look at when times godly men were called Satan. 1 Samuel 29:4. But the Philistine officers were angry with David, and the Philistine officers said, he shall not march down with us, or else he may become our Satan. In biblical Hebrew, that is the literal word that is used. David's kid was even given a Satan. In 1 Kings 11:14, so God raised up an adversary, Ha-Satan, against Solomon. The Satan he raised up was an Edomite to oppose him. Regardless, we can still see Satan being used only as a reference to someone who's getting in your way. The one change up we have from that in the Tanakh is actually Job, which, if you've been on my channel, you know that that's literally who I just went over. I did a whole video on Job. So we'll just quickly go over it. Job 1:6. One day the divine beings presented themselves before God, and Ha-Satan came along with them. In this term, he's literally known as the Satan. Remember that Has is kind of like the article, where Satan just means adversary. The Satan, Ha-Satan, came along with them. In Job 2:4, Ha-Satan actually talks to God, saying, skin for skin, all that a man has, he will give up for his life, telling God he needs to pressure Job even more. In the story of Job, the adversary, as it's originally known, or Satan, if you look up into like a King James Bible now, is merely testing Job to see if he's worthy to God. Satan, Hasatan, the adversary, whatever you want to call it, is not playing an evil role at all. And if you can still see on the evil scale down here, still not evil. Why would Hasatan be up in heaven with the divine beings talking to God, making bets, if he was an adversary to God? Satan is an adversary to humans who seek to worship God. Referencing back the quote I brought up before this video, Satan wants to keep bad people out of heaven in the Tanakh, whereas later on it's revised that he wants to drag bad people down to hell. So where did it all go wrong? How did it start getting mixed up into this one specific entity that's always Satan, Hasatan, whatever? Well, it happens in Chronicles whenever the Hebrew Bible was being written down. And after covering every single book of the Old Testament in one of my last videos, Chronicles is one of my least favorite books because it's just a retelling of Kings. You have the original history and oral Torah held in Kings, and then Chronicles, the chronicler, changes everything to make it a lot more palpable to like a religious palate. So here is a clear and obvious example of that happening. These two verses reference the exact same event, which is when David numbered all of Israel, had a census. In the King's books in 2 Samuel 24:1, we can see God's anger flared up against Israel, and God incited David against them, saying, "Go and number Israel and Judah." Yet way later, when we have the written Hebrew and we have the Chronicles, 1 Chronicles 21:1 says, Satan arose against Israel and incited David to number Israel. So the question's obvious. Who incited David? Was it God or was it Satan? This is an error made whenever scribes were putting down the written Torah, and they didn't really know all the specifics through all the books. I mean, there's a lot of books to go through. So when you have this adversary character popping up, in Numbers and Zechariah and Job, you start to maybe conflate, oh, this is all the same adversary, but it's not. It's just a role that's supposed to be fulfilled. When Chronicles comes along and they have to revisit the history of kings, they're replacing God's anger, why would God be angry and punish us, with a new figure of an adversary or a Satan who is always the one doing it in God's place. So Satan in this instance is not evil, he's semi-evil, evil-ish, if you could say, because he is still fulfilling the role of God. Because if Satan was gone, God's anger would have incited David. All right, here's where we get into the real meat of the video. We're going to have to go over the Greek translations. The Greek-speaking Jews in Egypt and elsewhere did not understand all the nuances of written biblical Hebrew. If you understand anything about the Hebrew language, you'll know that biblical Hebrew has a different rule set and is honestly quite different than the regular Hebrew we have today. And back then, these Greek-speaking Hebrews probably would have heard a lot through the oral transmission and then wrote it into Greek, where we get a bajillion different variations of everything that confuse everything. First up in those are the Gospels. So we'll just take a look at Satan in the Gospels. In Matthew, he's mentioned as a tempter. Jesus led up the spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. Then saith Jesus, "Get thee hence, Satan, for it is written, thou shalt worship the Lord thy God." Just like in Job, when Satan was a temptation character trying to get Job to curse God's name, we have the same theme here with Jesus being baptized and said, "This is my son, I am very pleased with Jesus," and immediately he's led into the desert to be tempted by Satan. Satan isn't evil here. He's still fulfilling that role of God that God was going to do otherwise. God wants his subjects to be tested to see how loyal they are. And Jesus passes in Matthew, luckily. In Luke and John, Satan is brought up in both of those by reference of Judas. So whenever Judas turns in Jesus or decides to turn in Jesus, it is said that Satan enters into him. So Satan here isn't a tempter, rather he possesses. Because in the story of Job and in the story of Jesus, Satan's not going into them. He's not possessing them and making them make decisions. However, here in Luke and John, we see that he is. To add on to that, we now have a bunch of new names for the devil that make it seem like there's more lore than there actually is to this point. In Matthew 12:24, the Pharisees are talking about Jesus healing the sick and the blind, casting out devils. They get mad and they go, but when the Pharisees heard it, they said, This fellow doth not cast out devils, but by Beelzebub, the prince of the devils, saying he only can cast out these devils because he's a devil himself. Jesus obviously responds after that with one of my favorite quotes by him, which is, a kingdom divided shall not stand, saying, why would Satan drive out Satan? But anyway, in Matthew 4:3, and when the tempter came to him, he said, if thou be the Son of God, command these stones to be made bread. When Satan approaches Jesus in the temptations, he actually is referenced as the tempter. The New Testament goes off with even more references to who this guy is. In 2 Corinthians 6:15, he's called Belial. In Ephesians 2:2, he's called the prince of the power of the air. And in Hebrews 2:14, when they're talking about how Jesus destroyed the devil with the resurrection, it said that through death he might destroy him, that he had the power of death, that is, the devil. Here it's referenced as death, the devil, being the same as Belial, the prince of the power of the air, being the same as Satan. And then we get to Paul. Okay, I'm coming for your ass. I have been reading so much about this Near Ancient East and the development of Jewish tradition and the early Christian church that I'm seeing this dude pop up everywhere. And every time it's Paul was never originally a Jew. Paul's not even his real name. He thought women were icky, and all he did was just bitch and complain to churches all the time. I mean, but let's look at Paul's sexy, stupid Satan. The best way to sum up Paul's views on Satan, because Paul had his own views about essentially everything in the early church. In 1 Corinthians, Paul is freaking out about how Satan is this sex demon that just tempts everyone. He's writing to the church because there was a case of assault. A man assaulted his stepmother, and so Paul is talking about all the devils of the flesh and Satan coming through. It's actually funny, Paul never uses the word devil, so I shouldn't say that. He only ever actually uses the word Satan in the official Paul letters. In 2 Corinthians, Paul highlights how Satan is not only stupidly sexy and will make you defile yourself, that he's also a trickster that transforms into an angel of light. In 2 Corinthians 11:14, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. What does that mean? Well, Paul believed that Satan was so powerful that he uses his transformation powers to come off as super hot or whatever and make you sin against God. I think this came from the fact that Paul had a lot of his own issues. I mean, I'm not trying to paint a picture of who Paul was, and then finally we get to the end of the Septuagint New Testament, which is Revelations. Here in Revelations, we have Satan mega evolving as a Pokemon. In 12:7, there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on each of his heads. Revelations is written like a schizophrenic poem, and we decipher that this is Satan because he has 7 crowns on it. There's another red dragon with 7 heads and horns, but he doesn't have crowns on it. So this one does. So we assume that's probably the King Red Dragon. Why is King Red Dragon devil coming from heaven too? I don't understand that. In 22, he laid hold onto the dragon and that serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years. So later on, 8 chapters, it confirms this is Satan. And if you figured out through context clues and the crowns that this is Satan, good job, you're keeping up with John. In Revelations 20:10, the devil that deceived them was cast into a lake of fire and brimstone. What? That's right, Satan gets defeated in the end. Did you not read that part in Revelations? Satan actually has already been defeated? Did you know Satan's already dead? I thought we had to wait for the rapture. Well, let's look into it. Let's look at what the Bible says. The fate of Satan is covered in Revelations 24-10. If you don't know, Revelations is written in the context of a dude named John who was tripping balls in a cave and wrote prophecies about what the future was going to happen. 99.99% chance he was writing about Rome, because every Christian was freaked out about Rome for valid reasons, because they killed the Christian's Messiah. In Revelations 24-10, John says, I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus, and which had not worshipped the beast, and they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. John saying that those who worshiped Christ get to reign with him when he comes back down for 1,000 years. Pretty cool, right? What happens after that 1,000 years, though? When the 1,000 years are expired, Satan shall be loosed out of his prison and shall go out and deceive the nations to gather them together for battle. So after 1,000 years of chilling with Christ, if you're a good Christian, I bring this to you. This doesn't end there. You actually, there's another battle with Satan coming up, but I guess we're just chilling for 1,000 years. At the end of Revelations, we are building up to this giant war of nations that will be this battle between light and darkness. It never actually happens. In Revelations itself, it just ends saying fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them. The devil that deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone and shall be tormented day and night forever and ever. According to Revelations, Jesus is going to come back. A bunch of dead people are going to raise. They're going to rule with him for 1,000 years. And then Satan's going to be let out of his prison. I don't know by who, presumably Jesus or God. And then Satan's going to come back and prepare for a giant battle that when it does occur, there's just going to be a server wipe. That's it. That's the whole Old Testament, New Testament right there. Every reference of Satan, everything you can come across on who this guy is, and obviously how he got transformed from just being a basic opposition to an actual entity. But if you know the lore of Satan, you may be wondering, what about the fallen angel stuff? What about Lucifer, all that? Well, that was actually added way later. So if you went back to Jesus' time and you were talking about Lucifer or Lucifer being an angel that was fallen from heaven, he'd go, what? Where did we get this modern conception of Satan? To understand how Satan evolved, we must look at the early church fathers, most importantly, Justin Martyr and Origen. Justin Martyr was writing about 100 years after Jesus died, and he's considered fundamental in the early church texts. He wrote 2 books we're going to talk about. First Apology, Second Apologies. These were the first Christian apologetics to people who didn't believe in Christ or the Messiah, and they were like, what is this new religion that's appearing? Justin was like, let me tell you all about all the lore. It's not in the Bible, but I'm coming up with more. First Apology, chapter 54, Justin says, those who hand down the myths, we proceed to demonstrate that they have been uttered by the influence of wicked demons, to deceive and lead astray the human race, for having heard it was proclaimed that the Christ was to come, they put forward many sons of Jupiter. What Justin is saying here is that once Jesus was coming down to be the Messiah, demons went, oh, we're so powerless, we have to go back in history and time and go invent a bunch of myths and make sure that people thousands of years ago know these myths so that when Jesus comes, they'll have something to discredit him with. Sick lore twist. Demons made up history. The only real history anymore is Christ. If you've heard that one before, congratulations. You grew up in an evangelist household. Welcome to the club. You should consider subscribing. I'm going to change your mind on things. In Second Apology, chapter 5, Justin talks about how angels were appointed over men and didn't like it. So God tells angels, hey, you're in charge of humankind. Angels transgressed this appointment and were captivated by love of women and begat children who are called demons. They afterwards subdued the human race themselves, partially by magical writings and partially by fears and the punishments they occasioned. So James, being the original church father, says, hey, these demons that are around, because we know there's demons and devils. I mean, in the gospel, Jesus is zip-zapping out devils that are causing people to be, paralyzed or mad. So they had these sort of germ demons that could possess people. Where did that come from? Because that wasn't truly associated with just Satan yet. Well, it came from this. Where is Justin Martyr getting this mating with angels thing? It's Second Enoch. Second Enoch is just a book that didn't make it into our version of the Bible, but is still celebrated by other Christians elsewhere, like Ethiopia. In Enoch, it's described how angels came down, had procreated with women, and those creations are now the demons. They don't have a place in the world, so they possess. They're like germs, infections, parasites. I don't know, whatever you want to call it. So through Justin Martyr, we can see where the Christian idea came from, that demons are descended angels, and that their goal is to discredit Christ and the Messiah or make him lose his power, that energy, whatever it is. Yet we don't have a specific Satan figure attached to these yet. We have that sort of adversary and Satan figure in the written text, and then we have Origen coming up with this demon mythology. We will see where this will get put together. Origen, who's writing about 200 years after Jesus died, wrote in Book 1 on First Principles, "The devil and his angels. The church teaching lays it down that these beings exist, but what they are or how they exist has not been explained clearly. Among most Christians, the following opinion is held. The devil was formerly an angel, but became an apostate and persuaded as many angels as he could to fall away with him." Later on in the book, he writes, "This also is laid down in the church's teachings that every rational soul is possessed of free will and choice and engaged in a struggle against the devil and his angels." Origen is the first church father to support the idea that Satan has an army against you, and that there is always this temptation trying to lead you astray. Whereas Justin saw that these demons and angels were, pushed down from heaven because they wouldn't take care of mankind, and now they sort of jealously hurt them. We see now in Origen, another 100 years, it's developed into this satanic army where they're coming after you, not just as separate entities, as a wildlife demon, but as there is a Satan figure leading an army against you. And not only that, but somehow that is a part of God's free will, because that'd be really weird to have an all-powerful, omnipotent God, yet have that army running around. So he says that all men, because of their free will, can be tempted by these demons so that God can see if people are truly Did we just take a loop back to the adversary in Job? I feel like we just got so far away from just a basic adversary testing to see if people are capable of going to heaven, like the adversary in Job. And now we have this possession, devils, demons who are testing you for God to the same thing. I'm starting to think that this Satan gets a bad rap. He's doing the same stuff he did all throughout the Bible, yet now he's framed like he's the worst guy ever, yet God is clearly allowing this to happen. So if it's a part of God's plan, why would you question Satan? That's part of God's plan. The lore of a true devil gets really cemented when we get to our next monotheistic religion, the Quran. And I've had tons of comments every time I post anything Jewish or Christian. I get snarky people who are like, "Yeah, you read the Quran? Have you read the Quran yet? Because you'll just figure out all of life if you read the Quran." Anyway, in the Quran, we talk about the fallen angel. In Surah Al-Isra 17:61-62, we see the lore. "Remember when we said to the angels, 'Prostrate before Adam, bow before Adam.' So they all did, but not Ilbis, who protested." Ilbis is just whenever we had the Aramaic translation of Hosatanus. When it went to Arabic, it was translated into Ilbis. Ilbis/Satan says, "Should I bow down to the one you have created from mud? Do you see this one you honored above me? I will certainly take hold of his descendants." Satan just going, "This creature is made of mud, and you want me to bow down to him? If you do this, God, I'm going to torture his descendants." Allah responded, "Begone! Whoever of them follows you, hell will surely be the reward for all of you. And incite whoever you can of them with your voice. Manipulate them in their wealth and children and make them promises. Satan promises them nothing but delusion." So a pretty bad breakup between God and, I guess, one of his favorite angels. We really haven't even seen that he's his favorite angel. There's no mention of that Lucifer even up to this point. But this is the first time we see hell actually associated with Satan. Before this, there is no association between literal, like Satan ruling over hell, like Hades ruling over the underworld. That we first see in the Quran, where God is saying anyone who follows Satan's path, hell will be the reward for you. Still not directly associating Satan with ruling over hell, but certainly he was the precursor that made hell a reward for those that fall away from God. We see in the Quran that Satan is mostly just a direct opponent of Allah. I'm going to butcher. Like I said, I don't speak Arabic. I'm sorry, guys. In Surah Al-Baqarah 268, "The devil threatens you with poverty and bids you to do shameful deed of stinginess, while Allah promises you forgiveness and great bounties from him." In Surah Al-Ma'idah 591, "Satan's plan to stir up hostility and hatred with intoxicants and gambling and prevent you from remembering Allah and praying." So the Quran sees Satan as already established as this devilish figure that's trying to torment your soul or drag you away from the free will that God gave you. Quran's only got to this point because of literally all of the lore that we saw established up to this point. Let's not forget that Muhammad was a Jew who went to the Jews saying that he was the new prophet, and he only started his own movement when they denied him, saying, "Dude, we just got over this Jesus thing. Everyone quit saying you're the Messiah and the prophet. We just want to be good old Jews and just talk about the old books and just keep it the way it is forever." Hundreds of years pass on after Muhammad's death, and we see the effects of all of this even in medieval law. So in the canon Episcopi, which is just a law during the Middle Ages, we see it's quoted, "The bishops and their ministers should by all means make great effort so that they may thoroughly eradicate the pernicious art of divination and magic invented by the devil, and if they find any man or woman adhering to such a crime, they should eject them. Even in medieval law, it was now cemented that the Satan character or devil, whatever, is real. They, much like the angels and the fallen angels we were talking about beforehand, who disobeyed God, went down to earth and had procreated with women, ruled over them with magical writings. We see that Justin Martyr, an origin reflecting almost 1,000 years after their death into medieval law. So these laws and these people were getting these ideas from already written church lore. This is where the religious starts to become just historical. The people believed what they believed because they thought that intelligent men before them had already figured all this out. Whereas we find that's never true, ever in life. With demonic possession, we see that there is a divide even up into the New Testament between a Satan figure and devils. For demons in the New Testament are seen as causing disease or causing people to go mad, whereas Satan is a tempter. He doesn't make anyone do anything outside of, I guess, Judas is the one example. And even in the times of Jesus, there were jobs like exorcists or healing men, magicians that would go around and perform feats on these, proclaimed insane people and would drive out demons just like Jesus. This was a common job at the time, sort of like a shaman or an exorcist. And just like that existed before the time of Jesus, it'll probably always exist. Now, what are these exorcisms? I haven't really done too much studying into it. I do believe that there are spirits that you can communicate to. I 100% do believe that these spirits can have actions on your physical world. They can manifest themselves into things that are very good or very bad, and it's truly up to your personal responsibility to know what you're talking to. Do not sign any deals unless you have asked every single question with the purest of intent, because there is stuff like this out there. But when you get confused with this religious mindset, it's like, what are you even worshiping? The term Satan has been co-opted by something else and tied to a religious movement that means nothing, and people fear it like it's real. When in reality, that just blinds you. If you're really scared of evil spirits, demons, whatever, I would back off any sort of preconceived concepts, especially if it was written thousands of years ago, because just like we evolve and become more spiritually adept, so do these demons. Second of all, we're talking about the rapture. So, like I said, I'm not really concerned about the rapture. If it happens, we got 1,000 years of Christ ruling, and I mean, we'll get to see the guy for who he is. If that doesn't happen, then it won't matter. I'll eventually end up doing a video on Revelations at some point. It's a lot of imagery to break down into meaning. Well, how do we wrap this up? Well, if you are a God-fearing Christian and you are struggling with the concept of Satan and hell, I would recommend you to not, for several reasons. First reason being, hell was never originally a place, and it's unlikely to be one. If you have any doubts about that, let's look into the Bible in Revelations 20:14, where it says, "Death and hell were cast into a lake of fire." As we know, death is another name for the devil, and hell is also cast in. How could hell, if it is a lake of fire, be cast into a lake of fire? Hell is just a loose concept for suffering. It's never been a real place. It's not described as a real place, and if it is, put the verse in the comments. No, if I ever get anything wrong, quote the dang book. I swear, some people are just like, "No, you're wrong," and I'm like, "So have you read anything?" And it's like, no, and they never have. To Jews, Satan is just an adversary of God, probably not evil. And in reading the Tanakh, I can't find any evidence that Satan is evil. He's a co-worker of God. To Christians, he's an occasional tempter of men, and he's an actor in the end times. To Muslims, he's a constant threat to Allah and you. Finally, just to conclude this, let's just understand. Originally, Satan just meant adversary. Jews struggled for thousands of years to maintain their traditions. They were constantly pressed in between superpowers. They were very rarely given control of their own promised land, and when they did, they had it for like maybe 100 years before they were again suppressed by another superpower. So Satan, in the tradition, is often just temptation to change traditions. After they've been exiled to Babylon, how are they supposed to come back to the promised land and maintain all those traditions when the God didn't even protect them in the first place? Well, any temptation to go against that is Satan. So just know, when the term Satan is used against you, it's just a scare tactic to keep tradition. When in reality, I don't know an all-loving God that wouldn't want you to figure out more about life and see the creation that he built for us to experience. We're still under control of these monotheistic religions that make no sense the more I look into them. They don't offer any sort of help into our current situations, and I got to figure out, well, what does? So that's why I've been interviewing spiritualists and doing my own independent research in the hopes to find a more common ground for all of us to come together and understand spirituality as people, not as cultures, but as we truly are. My name is Lane. This is Connection Lane. It's been a blast. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.